Welcome everyone to ArtsWorcester's East Gallery. My name is Juliet Feibel. I'm the Executive Director of ArtsWorcester, and I have the pleasure and the honor of being here with Lisa Barthelson, my friend and one of our foremost artists. And we are standing in the mix of her site-specific installation, Meld, Merge, Mix. And so Lisa is going to be sharing with us something about her process, her inspirations, and how this came to be. So without any further ado, I give you Lisa.
Thank you very much, Juliet. I'm thrilled to be here. I'm thrilled to have had the opportunity to create this installation in the East Gallery. I thought I'd start out by telling you a little bit about my background. I grew up in suburban New Jersey in a family of artists. My father was a commercial artist, my mother a fine artist who worked full-time in non-art jobs throughout our childhood. And my two sisters were painting majors in college. We had art making materials, and there was a lot of art making in our everyday lives throughout our childhood. I created my first painting with oil paint and turpentine in my backyard at 5 or 6, which seems sort of crazy to me now, but that was how we did it in our household. I always assumed that I would go to college to study fine arts, but when the time came, there wasn't the money to pay for college. So I realized that I was going to have to take out loans and to work my way through college, usually as a waitress. And I was under no illusions about how easy it would be to make a living as a fine artist upon graduation. So I decided to change my major, a very oddly pragmatic choice for me, and one that I think was a little bit naive at the time. I decided to change my major to environmental design and horticulture. I liked the fact that it included nature, design, and plants. I graduated with a Bachelor of Science from the University of Connecticut. That followed, I got a Master's of Landscape Architecture at the University of Massachusetts in Amherst, and then got my registration as a landscape architect in Massachusetts. I continued to make small art and larger art in a professional way for many, many years, and then eventually my family moved to Worcester. And I continued to make art, especially focusing on taking classes at the Worcester Art Museum and at the Worcester Center for Crafts, because those organizations allowed me to schedule time and a place, a safe place to make art, and to have an art community. They really furthered my practice. At that time I was focusing on painting and ceramics, and also taking photos. I've taken photos throughout my career as I moved through the world. As our lives in our home became more full with children and their activities, I decided I needed a separate, safe place to make art. Turpentine and oil paint in your dining room can be quite toxic. So I joined the Blackstone print studio, founded by Nina Fletcher, a friend and an artist in the 1990s. It was a new medium for me, and I did a lot of very joyful monoprinting sessions there, and I continue to be a member. Also in the 1990s, I dipped my toe into the Worcester cultural community by becoming director of ArtsWorcester for a couple of years. My time with ArtsWorcester fanned the flames of my desire to make art in a huge way. Being around artists, being connected to the cultural community, and creating programming and exhibitions just made me want to make art more than ever. Following my time at ArtsWorcester, I reached a nexus point. Our children were growing up. They were starting their young adult journey. They were looking to the future, and that was a big transition for my family. And at the same time, my mother, my beloved mother, who was an artist, was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. She was, unlike my children, moving in an opposite direction as her disease progressed and becoming more and more childlike and more like my child. In 2005, my mother died, and my resolve to make art strengthened. I decided that I would stop everything else I was doing and make art full-time to, in some way, realize some of her dreams, because she had retired not that long before she was diagnosed, and she had anticipated having many years to make art. So I want to channel her desires and to meet my goals and my dreams by making art. Thank you, Mom. At about this time, while our children were moving towards leaving home, I started to purge some of their stuff, or tried to start to purge it. I was shocked and appalled by how much stuff we had, how much stuff had been accumulated. It was very counter and different from my childhood, this sort of buy it economy, and somehow we bought into it. When I looked at what the debris that was left behind comprised, I was shocked at how much of it was plastic. And I did not want to put that into the landfill. And I tried to donate it at places, but at that point, places were not taking it. So I re-examined what I was using for art materials and decided that I would begin to incorporate some of this debris as my primary art materials, and that is what I did. In 2008, I started by making a full-size child's chair out of left behind or abandoned Duplos. I painted it black, and I scratched words and phrases that included the word out all over the chair like a scratch board, and those terms and phrases reflected my thoughts at the time about motherhood, my life, and childhood. I entered that first chair into the biennial at ArtsWorcester, and it was the first time I got into the biennial. The biennial was juried by Nick Capasso, who is now director of Fitchburg Art Museum, but at the time was with the De Cordova, and that was the beginning of the Family Debris series. Since that time, many Family Debris series pieces have ended up in curated exhibitions at Fitchburg Art Museum, the Newport Art Museum, the Danforth Art Museum, and I've continued to explore printmaking, mixed media, sculpture, and installation with my Family Debris work. And that Family Debris work has brought us here to the East Gallery at ArtsWorcester. I was so excited about this gallery when ArtsWorcester studios were redesigned. It was a perfect scale for an installation, an immersive installation. In 2016, I had done an installation at the wide open spaces at Sprinkler Factory, where I had brought in a truckload of stuff, dumped it on the floor, and took a week to do improvisational and spontaneous exhibition. At ArtsWorcester, I submitted a proposal where I could take it further, really evolve, where you would have an immersive experience, and that is meld, merge, and mix. So when I envisioned this installation, I wanted to reuse much of what I'd already created and create new components that would embrace the visitor. My drive right now is to create sustainable art. Sustainable art can take many forms, but in my practice is to reuse objects and art materials that I've either reused before or are obsolete and mundane. When you look around the gallery, you'll see pieces of toys and domestic goods and previously used architectural and sculptural elements. But you'll also feel embraced by the color, which ArtsWorcester was kind enough to let me paint the walls. And what you don't hear right now is there's one other element, and that I've included for the first time, and that's sound. Now, when you look at the space, it's an explosion of chaotic color, and there's a sense almost of it being like a garden. Underlying your visit here, there's a soundtrack which presents nature, a very subtle underlying soundtrack which reminds you that all of this excess, all of this explosion of color, all of this explosion of single-use plastics that have now controlled and dominate our life are threatening nature. And that though this is joyful and it's bright and it brings us beyond some of the darkness of winter and the pandemic, we really need to pause and think about the direction we're all headed. Though I don't want to beat you over the head with it, I do want you to enjoy the color and the feeling. So I want to thank ArtsWorcester for giving me this opportunity and responding to my proposal. And I hope that this work speaks to you, the elements, you recognize some of the things that are in your own house, and that you feel the way that I do when you look at some of these elements and say, well, maybe it's time for change. I hope you'll come by and immerse yourself in meld, merge, and mix. Thank you very much, ArtsWorcester.
All right, we are back, and I have some questions I want to ask Lisa and a conversation that we can have. First, I would like to know how you decide what gets to be art. Does everything that comes through get to be art, or what is the sorting process?
Not everything, thank God, is used in my art because I have a long and healthy marriage, and I don't think it would have been sustainable from that aspect. One of the things is I look at the materials from sort of an artistic standpoint, the color, the form, the shape, the texture. And if I begin to see a lot of the same thing coming through the house, those particular items begin to talk to me and guide or direct me. For example, toothbrushes. I saw toothbrushes and they're so resource heavy, so designed, and we use so many of them. I started to collect toothbrushes, which went into a piece that was at the Fitchburg Art Museum. Single-use plastic for organic vegetables. There's so many of them. I started to collect those and started to cut them. And I have to say toys, because I realized they're bright, they're colorful, they have my children's imprint on them. I wanted to tell a little bit of the story of their childhood and my motherhood. And when I work with them, I sort of revisit. They're almost like an archive of my family. And then at some point I noticed that packaging, cardboard packaging, was so bright that I started to save that. Now that's a big problem because there's so much of it. It's almost overwhelming. And when I do this work that includes so much of our consumer goods or our waste stream, I realize it's a little bit like airing our dirty consumer laundry. We're being upfront about this is how we spend our money and this is the byproduct.
Well, that's actually what I wanted to ask you about next, because there is a experience in this installation in which the viewer gets a very personal and private view, not only of your household's debris, but of your household and your family. And I wanted to know what your family or how your family feels about their stuff becoming on public view in this way.
There's been an evolution. At first, I really used things that my kids had put in black plastic bags and said, get rid of it. So I thought it was fair game, but I was being naive and not really very sensitive to they were still their personal goods. I won't identify which child felt which way, but
good mom.
One child felt exposed and that I was not very sensitive and that it was unfair of me to use that stuff without asking first. And I took that to heart. I really understood. At first I was baffled because it was on its way out, it would end up in a landfill. But it was personal stuff. I have to remember not to say the gender. And then one child was really interested and fascinated and actually wants to own some of the pieces that include their stuff. And one other child just kept bringing me more stuff and saying, how about this? How about this? This would be good in there. So it was the gamut of response. And my husband, incredibly tolerant to my stockpiling and very excited actually about the artwork and has continued to be really supportive.
We are grateful to them for embracing the process. Right. And so I'm going to actually push on the privacy a little more and ask, can you paint a picture of what it's like in your studio or the spaces? Are there, because it's all exquisitely clean. How do you sort? What does it look like? What is your system?
Well, when it's at home is really when it has to get cleaned because a lot of the stuff takes scrubbing and drying and spreading out. So before it comes into my studio, for the most part, it's cleaned. I have bins and bins and bins and bins of stuff. And as I continue in the Family Debris series, I have so much stuff that it's shocking. One of the things I do is I'll deconstruct and reconstruct. I'll reuse materials over and over and over again. I'll take some artworks and take it apart and reuse it in another way, which I really find a challenge, and I love doing that. But some of it I'll save and I'll reuse, but it's jam-packed. One of the first things I ask every sculptor that I meet is, what do you do for storage? And it's very, very tricky. I'm also printmaking, so much easier to store printmaking than it is for sculpture. When I bring a bag of stuff from home that I've decided to save or recycle, I sit in this chair that used to be my grandfather's, and I sort through it, and I put this in this bin, this in this bin, and I have it ready to go for the next time I start to make things.
So on that same theme, people throw the word sustainable around in conjunction with art quite often. So I'm going to ask you if you can talk a little bit about sustainability in art, because I'm hearing it in two ways, not just the material, but the art making process itself, when you're talking about reusing pieces. If you could say more.
Well, there are many facets to sustainable art, from making art that makes people think about climate and the future, with original materials, things that make people think about how they live. I recycle, repurpose, reuse, reimagine materials. That's what sustainability is for me. I try to limit the new things that I purchase. I will admit that there are certain things that I do purchase, things that are connectors that help put things together, like wire. I love wire, it's very malleable. I can reshape it in different ways. When I do sculpture, I tend to screw it together because I can then take it apart easily, and I like seeing the connections. The pieces on the side, I've used zip ties, which are plastic. Is that sustainable? No, but the plastic can be reused. And again, I really like to see the connections. I like to see how things are put together. The construction fence is something I bought over 10 years ago for an outdoor installation, and I've reused it over and over and over again because it's durable, it's bright, and it can be used outside. So I look to things that can be reused over and over and over again. That's my version of sustainability.
Thank you. So now I'm going to ask you to shift gears and talk a little bit about your experience in this gallery. One of the reasons I'm so excited about this exhibition is because it allows this gallery to show what can be done. We don't see a huge amount of site-specific installation. We don't see a lot of video or time-based art. Both galleries, but particularly this one, are built for it. And you find, somebody is finally using the room the way it can be used. If you can talk about your process in this space, what it was like, what your expectations were, what you learned along the way.
Well, I started out by making a foam core model, to be honest, of the space, with the doors, the height of the walls. I did sketches, I moved things around, but I really felt like I wouldn't know till I was in the space. So I collected work from early exhibitions, recycled materials, and many, many things that I had within my studio, and I decided I was going to truck it all here. Well, it took me many, many, many trips. But I knew from the beginning that I wanted to paint the walls because I wanted you to feel immersed in a sense of enclosure. And I have to say, Rebecca Tuck, she had a painted wall, so I knew it was a possibility. And when I asked ArtsWorcester and they were so receptive, I was thrilled. I also wanted to deal with the ceiling. We didn't do it as much as I had hoped because we sort of ran out of time, but I do like that sense that you can use your track lighting to really give a ceiling to the exhibition. So for other people, I would suggest you pursue that. I liked the scale of this space, which I think is perfect, and that window that you look into. When I submitted my proposal, I likened it to a diorama, like a children's shoebox, where they create an experience or a small world, but this was human scale, where you had a ceiling and enclosing elements around, a place that you could actually walk into and have the same feeling of another environment, another world.
And we see that actually all the time. I hear watching people come past the exhibition in the hallway, they stop, they look, sometimes they come up to the window to get a better look, but it has that magical feeling. You and I were here when a small child was in the gallery, and that was a wonderful experience because we didn't realize the exhibition really did require a 5-year-old in a red dress skipping through the installation. So
lying on the floor.
exactly, looking up. People are engaging with us in all kinds of ways that we did not expect. So I really want to thank you for sharing your family's debris, for sharing this process with it, for transforming the space and giving us so much light and color in the middle of winter, and also much to think about.
I would like to say one thing, and I meant to say this earlier. One of the parameters of the Family Debris series is I only use my family's debris. People are always offering me stuff, so please don't. At some point, maybe I'll take other people's debris, but not until I run through this, and guess what? That isn't happening soon. But my goal is to reuse what we already own, what we've consumed, our footprint on the earth. So that's our family debris.
We are all invited to contemplate our own household debris. Thank you so much, Lisa. Thanks to everybody who helped put this together.
Thanks, Juliet.